which hand to hold what in. Oh, I have a new shirt, and they don't sell that shade of orange anymore, so it's more rust-colored now, but still trying to stay on brand. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Merholz. And yes, my talk is on, this is one of those, I like to look at my slides to pretend I'm like a member of the audience with you. It gives us something to connect over. And I also, someone pointed out we should draw like a white spot on the slides that can serve as a spotlight. Anyway, so I'm going to give a talk, The Evolving Design Leader, Embracing Your New Form as You Advance in Your Career. This is a talk for people who love frameworks. There's frameworks coming out the yin yang. I'm an organizational designer now, so that's how I orient. You can always reach out to me, Peter Merholz on LinkedIn. That is my Mastodon handle because fuck that guy. So you can find me on Mastodon and my website. So as Preet mentioned, I've spoken at this conference before when I was last here in Toronto. And you can see, look, the same X. I'm sure you didn't make a new one, I'm guessing. I gave a talk on the fundamentals of design leadership, which I'll actually be digging into in a master class tomorrow. And so 3 years ago I was here, I gave this talk. Since then, it's been an interesting time. But among other things, I'm going to ignore society for a moment and just talk about design. Among other things, we've seen within design teams explosive growth. And teams within companies going from maybe not 7 to 300 in 3 years, but we've just seen teams grow and grow and grow. And I've been supporting them. I'm currently supporting a team right now that when I started working with them, they were a little under 400. They were maybe 350 designers. This is for a big North American bank. And now they're 800 about a year and a half later. So we're seeing explosive growth, even with what's been happening in the last few months with layoffs. Teams are still bigger than they were. And one of the factors, something that happens when you have explosive growth is you now all of a sudden need a bunch of new leaders that weren't there before to manage all these people. And so we have a lot of managers and design directors and VPs who are new in that position, who've been swept up into these roles in order to manage the growth. And it can lead to something referred to as the Peter Principle, not named for me, but named for a gentleman, Lawrence J. Peter. He was an organizational theorist, and he has this statement: every employee tends to rise to their level of incompetence. He's speaking particularly in hierarchical organizations where you get promoted because you're doing your job well, but then the next level, you're not actually able to do that job. You don't know what that job is. And so when you have this type of hypergrowth with all these new directors and managers and VPs, we have the potential for a lot of incompetence. And that's what I'm hoping to help you get ahead of, or to at least better understand maybe why you are incompetent. I haven't been sleeping great, so I'm going to be a little punchy today. So in some work I was doing recently, I was interviewing some of the design executives at one of my client companies. And this quote comes from that conversation. And in this, she's talking about a member of her team who she has promoted from manager level to director level. And I had to have an intense conversation with someone on my team who is struggling with the shift from design manager to design director. I found that she's still doing the thing that product managers love, getting into the nitty-gritty details, but the product lead, who would be her peer, is still waiting for a vision statement, a hypothesis where the experience could be going. She went too deep too fast and hadn't gotten alignment on strategic direction. I call out this quote because it's kind of at the heart of my talk. As design leaders, as we advance in our careers, we often don't know what our job should be. I'm going to use I'm introducing just this framework of a design org. I have a blog post on the emerging shape of design organizations. I see that we're having some of those type challenges. I forgot to fix this slide. It's fine. But the idea being, in a team of roughly 40 folks, you'll have a VP of design, you'll have a couple design directors, some design managers reporting to them, a bunch of product designers. You might have horizontal folks. I'm not going to be talking about org design too much today. Happy to have those conversations at breaks and lunch. I just wanted to situate us all in a common reference of a design organization. We're going to focus primarily on the management, though we will get into senior individual contributors. And so as you're growing as a design leader, you're a designer or researcher, content person. I use designer somewhat generically in that regard. You're some form of designer, and then at some point you get promoted, and now you're a design manager, and then you'll get promoted into a design director, and then you'll get promoted into a VP. And if your company doesn't use these terms, you start off in the front line, managing the people doing the work. You then are middle management, kind of keeping the trains moving, navigating between the senior and more junior people on your team. And then ultimately you grow into being an executive. You're kind of in charge. And we're going to unpack each of these. Another way, though, to think about it, and particularly from an evolutionary perspective, is to adopt Pokemon. So as design manager, you're Charmander, right? You're cute, you got your little fire tail. And then as a design director, you change your shape, and you become Charmeleon, and then you are fully realized as Charizard. Now, this is the goal. This is what you want. What happens, though, what I see over and over again is design leaders starting as Charmander, and then when they get promoted, they're just more Charmandering. Maybe they've got 2 fire tails, and then as they become a VP, they're just Charmandering some more with 3 fire tails. They're not doing the new thing. They're staying kind of in their initial form, just more so. So now I've learned, in order to appeal to Canadians, use Pokemon. Chris, you're catching this for your talk? Okay. He and I have kids roughly the same age, so I'm sure he's well versed in all things Pokemon. I didn't know anything about it until my kids got into it. So I'm going to introduce 2 different frameworks that intersect for this talk. And the first one, if you happen to be here in 2019 or saw the video that was shared of it, will be familiar to you. This is the 4 archetypes of the design leader. It starts with you in the center as the design leader. Your first archetype is that of the coach, managing down, getting the most out of your team. So you have this kind of downward-facing relationship. The second archetype is that of the diplomat, managing across, managing sideways, working with things like product management and engineering, making space with your cross-functional partners, making space for great design to happen. And then the third set of relationships is managing up and out, executives, other stakeholders. I call that archetype the champion. I'm going to be focusing on the relationships aspect, so these 3 archetypes. There is a 4th archetype, which we'll actually get into tomorrow for those in the masterclass, which is that of the architect, which is enabling success as you scale. We're not going to talk about the architect today, though. Just these 3 sets of relationships. So that's the first. How does a design leader orient and on whom? The second framework is, what does a design leader focus on? Because this changes over time. When we think of design leaders, we tend to think of creative leadership, right? That's, being able to do vision, creative direction, how do we practice, what are our standards of quality, all with the goal of driving higher quality work out the door. But that's only one area of focus for a design leader. Design leaders also need to care about the business. They need to understand how the business works. They need to understand how design work connects with business goals, with cross-functional strategy and planning, in order to help realize business success. This was some of the conversation that Andy, among others, mentioned yesterday, right? Tying the work of your team to business success. But then design leaders also need to be thinking about the people in their organization, and they need to be concerned with recruiting and hiring, which we heard from Jessa a lot about, performance and career development. Actually, I'm going to be leading the breakout on career architectures. So that's what we'll be focusing on there: performance, career development, career growth, culture. All of which there you have an objective to drive team health, right? Team engagement, high morale, low attrition, those types of characteristics. And then you have a fourth area, which is operations, like just making sure we're effective as an organization. So you have aspects like program management, communication and coordination, budget, scheduling, those types of things, all to drive effectiveness. So you have these four areas and those three sets of relationships, and the calculus changes as you evolve in your career. So this is going to be one slide that builds very slowly over time. Don't take pictures until the end. So as we said, you start off as a design manager. What does a design manager do? What are they ultimately responsible for? Pretty simple. High quality output, because they're the ones managing the people doing the work, putting the stuff out there. And engaged and enthusiastic team members, right? They're coaching those folks, trying to get them to do their best work and to feel engaged. So a design manager, these numbers will add up to 100. A design manager spends roughly 2/3 of their time managing that team in order to deliver on these expectations. They're going to have to spend some time working with other design managers. If you think back to that 40-person organization, you got 4 or 5 design managers, coordinating with them, making sure that like all of the efforts across teams is working well together. And they're going to need to spend some time across functions with those product leaders and engineering leads, making sure that their teams as they collaborate are working well together. And so if we then, so that's the shape of their relationships. If we look at what they're focusing on, they're primarily focusing on creative leadership and people leadership because they're managing down the people doing the work. It's about quality and it's about kind of team health. So that's the lion's share of their concern. And they spend the remainder of their time thinking a little bit about the business, but that's not, they're not really concerned with strategy. They need to understand kind of what the general goals are that they're driving towards. And operations, their team isn't that big, so there's not a lot to operate there. So this is what it means to be a design manager. You spend most of your time managing down, focusing on the work and the people. When you become a design director, when you embrace your inner Charmeleon, things change. You now are working relationships to make space for great design, right? So you're going to be working with the product leaders and the engineering leaders for that. And then aligning design execution, the work that the managers are overseeing, with received strategy, the strategy that you're going to be getting from your senior leadership. And so the mix of time spent is actually should be quite different, right? Way less time managing down because your managers are the ones managing down. So you're managing your managers, but you don't. Hopefully those managers don't need a lot of management. You're spending maybe 1/3 of your time managing down. Some of your time with other design directors, right? If you think back to that org chart, you know, making sure that the work of the teams is aligned. But now you have this huge leap where design directors at this level, you're working with directors of product, directors of engineering around making that space, working relationships to make a space for great design. And so your time, and then you start spending a little bit more time managing up and out with executives. And so your time is split almost evenly, hope I'm not getting ahead of myself, almost evenly across these 4 areas. Far less creative leadership, though some, you got to make sure that they're doing good work. Far less people leadership because you're not doing as much managing down. Business takes the biggest leap because now you're having to interpret the receive strategy into the work that your teams are doing. And operations takes a leap because a design director, if you remember that slide, I mean, there's 20-some people in their organization. And so now communication and coordination is a challenge. That quote from that design executive that I shared where the design manager was promoted but was still in the nitty-gritty, this is the issue they were seeing. The design director was still behaving as a design manager, was focusing too much on work and people and not enough on kind of the relationships and strategic matters. So now becoming the VP, becoming a design executive, there's an assumption here, this is the head of design. There are organizations big enough where there are multiple VPs. I mean, your mileage will vary based on many factors, and we can get into that. The VP of design now has a different set of responsibilities, wholly different, totally new. They're accountable for design as a value-driving function. Why should we even have a design team? How do I know that it's actually delivering value in my organization? You know, says the CEO. The VP of design is the one who validates that, justifies that, helps connect the work of their org with value. We're no longer receiving strategy, we're now informing business strategy. We have the seat at the table, and so we're helping inform business strategy. We're not in the weeds about quality, but we're setting a quality bar, quality standards, UX metrics, those types of things that our organization is now needing to uphold in order to demonstrate that impact. And to do that, we change the relationships again. We're now spending even less time managing down, right? Hopefully your design directors are pretty capable, self-sustaining individuals. Need some coaching and management, but not a lot. You're spending a lot of time with your peer executives, and we're going to get into this a bit more. And kind of the irony is the higher you go, the more time you spend managing up. Even though there's fewer people above you, that's now your audience. And so you're spending about 30% of your time managing up, and no more time within design, because again, the assumption here is you're the head of design. And as you can imagine, the mix shifts again, where you're spending even less time now on creative and people leadership, and almost half your time as a business person. Like a design executive is not a designer, they're a business person. And I have operations shrink, not because they're less important at this level, but because if by this point you don't have someone managing your design operations, you're hosed anyway. And so with some assumption that you have someone who's helping you with design operations, you no longer have that as much of a concern at that level. So yes, this is take out your cameras. A couple things I want to point out before moving on. Actually, I think I can do this. A couple things I want to point out before moving on. I referred earlier to design director as middle management. And when you see it laid out like this, it really becomes stark. They spend half their time with design, half their time outside of design, so they're 50-50. When thinking of those areas of attention, it's almost an even split across those. And one of the realizations I've had since making this and then reflecting on it in front of folks is that is far and away the most thankless job within the design organization. You have a lot of responsibility, a decent amount of accountability, and almost no authority. You're trying to take the received strategy and interpret it in a way for your teams to execute, but you're not really doing a lot to inform that strategy in this case. The mental image I have is of plate spinners. You know, you'd see they're just trying to keep things moving. Your job is just to keep all these bits moving, ideally in the right direction. So that's one thing to call out is any design directors in the audience, I see you, I feel you, I get you. The other thing that comes up when I share this is this is based on an organization of a certain size, roughly 40 folks. I end up working with a lot of teams where the design teams are smaller, 15, 20 folks. And one of the challenges then is that you don't have 3 clean levels. And so if you are in an organization where there's 15 or 20 folks and you're a design leader, you're probably doing 2 of these at once. And so if you're feeling that stress, I also feel you and I see you. And now you kind of understand why. You are doing 2 jobs at once. Right? There's a lot that's expected of you as a head of design of a 15 to 20 person team. You can't only be in the clouds. You're also operating as the design director, overseeing the work of the team. And that's tough because you're spending some of your time with the CEO and then other time Not quite in the weeds, but having to go more deep down, and you're bouncing around. So, speaking of the VP of Design, we're going to spend a little more time now focusing on what it means to be a design executive, the shape of the design executive role. So as I said before, accountable for design as a value-driving function. One of my favorite books for managing is called The Manager's Path. It's actually meant for tech leaders, but I found it to be like you basically can swap out the word tech or engineering and put in designer, researcher, et cetera, and it works. It's written by Camille Fournier, and it's just a great handbook for design management. It's engineering management, but you can apply it to design management. And towards the end of the book, as she talks about the engineering executives, she has this line, and I'm going to translate it now for design executives. First and foremost, a chief design officer must care about and understand the business, that's why it's rated so high, and be able to shape business strategy through the lens of design and user experience. She is an executive first and a designer second, right? And this is one of the hardest realities for heads of design and VPs of design to accept, is they are no longer designers first. That is not the job. And you're doing your team a disservice if you keep acting like that is the job. As a friend of mine, Ryan Rumsey, has a company called Second Wave Dive, he just launched Chief Design Officer School, said in a tweet thread, the VP job is a whole hell of a lot of everything you might have avoided your entire career. You're a designer. You're like, I like to make stuff. I'm creative. I'm generative. And now I spend all my time in spreadsheets and I'm in a lot of meetings. And how did I get here? It's the job. And part of the reason I'm pointing this out is you might not want that job. And that's okay. We need people to find the job that's right for them, not the job they think they should have. So, as a VP of design, as a design executive, your peers in product, engineering, marketing, that's your first team. This is a concept that comes from Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, is the most popular, but I prefer his book, The Advantage, which is all the frameworks with none of the parables. If you're familiar with his work, it's a lot of parables. I don't need parables. It's not how I process the world. So I recommend The Advantage. So as I was saying before, right, the VP of design, their relationships with other VPs becomes their most important thing. That's their first team. They're spending most of their time, or more time, on business leadership than anything else. The issue is that this creates a gap because the rest of the org is looking up to that VP as a source of inspiration, as a source of vision. And the VP's like, okay, but if they try to do that, then all of a sudden you're basically asking them to be this kind of design Jesus, and they're, instead of a reasonable set of time, they're now just like doing at least 2 jobs, if not 3 or 4. And that leads to burnout. That leads, I think, frankly, to a lot of the issues we heard on stage last night or towards the end of day, like overwork, burnout, lack of clarity, our leaders not knowing what to ask from us, our team asking different things from us, and we in the middle just trying to navigate all these expectations. I don't want you to burn out. I want you to be actualized. So how do we achieve that actualization? Well, we got to set boundaries. I think that was one of the things that we discussed. I think one of the ways we achieve actualization, so as an organization designer, I look at organizational solutions. These aren't the only solutions, but I think they're definitely a means, a mechanism towards sanity. So one thing when I work with VPs of design who find themselves in this situation, I encourage them is to introduce senior individual contributors, ICs, to share leadership. So if you're that VP of design, maybe you have a design architect who reports to you and is supporting to you. Hi, Christina. So Christina is the head of design at Etsy. I don't know what your relationship is with Michael yet, but she's got a design strategist who works in a role very similar to this in her org. It actually exists. When I say this stuff, I think people think I'm making up like fairy stories about this. There are people doing this work today. So a design architect, I don't know, does he report to you? Okay, used to, doesn't anymore. She's got a big org. She's got a lot going on. It's okay. But someone super senior who can report to the VP, and we'll talk more about what they're doing. And then the design directors also need some help. And so principal designers, not as senior as, say, a design architect, who support them so that they can be that plate spinner and their organization doesn't drop plates. And then it's not just ICs, it's where the operations folks become super important as well, right? If you don't have dedicated operations, you remember the number on the far right-hand side, that will just keep going up and up and up if you don't have operations, right? It goes from 10 to 20 to 50. And so you need that support. And the way it ends up kind of working is something like this. I am always going to advocate for teams. I think we as design practitioners, people, tend to think individually too much. We tend to focus on the individual designer too much, and instead we should be thinking about how do we get small groups of people to achieve things. And so that includes the leadership team. There should be no VP of design just hanging out on their own trying to do all of these things. Or in order for them to be able to do what I was explaining, you need the design architect, creative and strategic leader, articulating a design-led vision, doing mentorship within the organization around craft, helping raise the level of craft in the organization. And those folks don't give a hoot about operations and people. There's no one reporting to them. So they get to focus solely on the creative and strategic leadership. Similarly, some head of design ops, perhaps crossed with a chief of staff we're starting to hear more of, but an operational and organizational leader developing the systems, frameworks, playbooks that enable leadership, right? That's where you get all the effort in operational effort coming at that level. Because if you don't have this, that 42 goes right in there. I've been in that position. I've been the VP without an operational leader where I spent over half my time in operations. That's not adding value to the firm. And so that by thinking of them as a team, you can now delegate responsibilities, and teamifying leadership allows each of these roles to focus and be achievable. Again, I'm trying to prevent burnout. I'm trying to let you work at most 40 hours a week to enjoy your life outside of work and to set up structures that enable that. And it's not just at that level, it happens at the mid-level. I'm guessing there's probably more folks in this audience who are hitting the design director level than perhaps the VP level. So a design director, remember spinning plates, they're spread across a lot of things. So that principal designer who can support them, like the architect creative leader, some differences. They might go broad, right, across the design director's organization, kind of wiring up the different areas of it. Or maybe they'll go kind of deep, spearheading an important piece of work. I refer to this role as the big project team lead, right? This design director has some strategic product they're going to launch, super important, has to be done right. Have the principal designer lead that work. Their focus is primarily creative with some business, but again, they don't have to worry about people and ops. And then the DPM, coordinating the work streams across the director's domain, doing measurement, doing dashboarding, doing all that kind of stuff, the red, yellow, greens around how things are going, cross-functional planning, right, with product and engineering, and their focus, operations and the business, a little bit on people. But they're really there. The DPM, you know, if I go back to this, right, the DPM is, say, that DPM is really orienting on the design director and helping all this hum. That's their focus. Now we're going to have animations. Sorry about that. So that's their focus. So last slide. Embrace discomfort and let go. So as a design manager, as the Charmander, right? And what we see even as we get past this, we continue to manage down, many folks continue to manage down or even do the work because it's a comfortable space, right? We were designers, we were given a lot of plaudits and a lot of backpats as designers. Now we're managers. When things get tough, we revert to where we were comfortable, which is in doing the work. But not evolving is irresponsible, right? If, as a design director, you're still behaving as a design manager, I consider that irresponsible because it's limiting your impact. You have this larger organization that's looking to you to help them be their best selves. And so you need to figure out how to work those relationships to serve that organization. Because it's those relationships and ability to influence and drive through the organization, that's how we empower our teams, right? So a VP of design, they have a superpower. And that superpower is that other executives listen to them. And so they should wholly take advantage of that superpower that other executives listen to them on behalf of their organization. If you're seeing a lot of your VP of design, they're probably not doing their job right. If you're not seeing your VP of design, you might be frustrated. You're like, where's Mary? But if they're doing their job right, they're having a lot of conversations that you know nothing about on behalf of you and your organization. So with that, I thank you for your consideration. And I'll turn to Preet to figure out what we're doing from here.
That was amazing, Peter. No surprises. uh, let's do 3 to 4 questions because I'm sure there will be a lot of.
We got a hand raised already. This man is eager. Good morning.
I don't really know what to say now, but so first of all, great talk. One of the issues that I guess I've faced with climbing up within the design leadership is, as you mentioned, the more business acumen that's needed, the higher that you go. Now, I think we can all agree that we live in a different time where we're all not necessarily running to get our MBAs. So where do we, especially in the fast-paced nature of our industry, where do we end up picking up the skills needed in order to effectively do the job that you have articulated here?
Sorry, we have microphones. You could get an MBA. That was something Christina and I were talking about. It was a while ago that she got it, but it takes 2 years. It might not be the right use of your time, though there are programs and companies that will support folks getting kind of an executive MBA. And I've seen a lot of design leaders. Kendra Schimmel, Adaptive Path. She's now running not just design, but design and product at a company called Compass, which is a real estate firm. I think part of the reason she has that ability is she got an executive MBA at one point while she was doing her job. So there are those programs. I mentioned Ryan Rumsey. He does have, through Second Wave Dive and his new Chief Design Officer School, he's creating programs to teach business savvy and business acumen to design leaders to give them almost exactly that kind of the what you missed by not going to business school types of stuff. So there are resources out there. Has anyone done that business learning? Christina's raising her hand. I don't know if we can get her a microphone to share. And if anyone else has had good experiences bolstering your business knowledge.
I send my team to Ryan's training. So I actually totally support that and think it's great. I've actually sent 3 of my team members, one of my directors that just got promoted to senior director. So definitely shout out for that. There's also some online training like Section 4 where I actually do some teaching, not to, not to promote that, but there's other places where you can get the information without taking the time to invest in an MBA. So if anyone wants to have conversations about that or, how to navigate that, please come see me at one of the breaks.
Yeah, the dirty secret, and Christina might tell me that I'm full of shit, and I'm going to just start swearing now. The dirty secret about business is it's not that hard. The basics that you'll need for your job are actually pretty basic. Some basic financial knowledge, some basic math, some basic understanding of I don't know, internal rate of return and net present value and making a business case connect, lifetime customer value. It's like literally maybe a semester's worth of work to kind of, because you don't need to be the financial expert. Your company has those, kind of to what Bob Baxley was saying yesterday. But you need to be able to understand how to frame the work of your team in the language that the company is adopting, and to do so with confidence, right? The sense I got in talking to Christina is that MBA, the most important thing it gave her is confidence when she's in those rooms with a bunch of people who also have MBAs and authority to engage with them. Because she's like, I know what you know. It's not, the stuff she taught us yesterday is actually way more interesting and probably harder to develop competency in than business. So.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Yeah, just from a senior plus IC perspective, I noticed that you have the up to 100 in the middle. You kind of shared the kind of areas of focus, but not necessarily the organizational direction for the senior plus ICs. Can you give us a sense of that?
Sure. Okay. I'm not going to go to those slides. It's going to take too long. Sorry. But I'll talk to it, right? So we had the architect who was 50-50 reporting to the VP of design, and then we had the principal designers who were 66-33 supporting the design director. Their relationships are similar-ish, probably ratcheted downward, right? So if you're a principal, sorry, let me think about this. Yeah, if you're a design architect, you're probably spending less time across functions, less time managing up, and maybe 40% of your time, I haven't done the math, 40 to 50% of your time managing down, because you're the creative leader, right? And so the org is looking up to you for that direction, for that leadership. And so there's a need to engage, not from a management perspective, but from a kind of teaching and mentorship and bringing up perspective, also with direction, like providing that creative direction. And then for the principal designers, it's going to be similarly, right? They might be, instead of 35, they might be at 50% down. The one thing about those IC roles is they still have a lot of lateral importance. In fact, so I have this talk. I'm going to have to jump ahead to that org chart. Ooh, this is going to take a while. I've written about a concept that I call the shadow strategy team. And the idea behind the shadow strategy team is that, we're almost there, is that your design architect, there we go, and your principal designers become this shadow strategy team. So many organizations, when they think about design strategy, will have a separate team of design strategists who do this amazing visionary work that never gets taken up. It feels like this kind of weird consulting kind of cyst that's just hanging off the organization and not woven in to the fabric. And so to avoid that, by having your senior ICs, particularly the principal designers embedded in these orgs, right, they're seen as members of, say, the applications team and the platform team, but they work across and with the design architect to really be able to create design strategies that are org-wide. And then when those design strategies are shared with these teams feel they're more likely to adopt it because one of their team members was directly involved in contributing to it. So there is a fair bit of that diplomacy, that kind of peer relationship that has to happen in order to keep those things connected. Are you a senior IC? Yeah. We need more.
So thank you for the talk. It explains some poor managers that I've had in the past.
Share this with your poor managers.
One question I have is around the senior IC role here. We've experimented with something like this in the past at our company, and one of the challenges we found is that if there isn't a coordinating role in the cross-functional organization, so say a senior IC PM and a senior IC engineering leader, they kind of end up in this little cave, and it really feels like their work doesn't really get to see the light of day. Kind of similar to that cyst sort of, and I'm just wondering if you've seen any kind of ways to help
Yeah.
help make the case for this as like at an organizational level as opposed to just maybe in one function.
Well, I mean, so from an organizational standpoint, product management is a crap show, and we need to just set that aside. Organizationally, that's a community that
Does anyone do it right? Can you talk to me?
organizationally, that's a community that hasn't figured its stuff out. They're trying, and there's a lot of effort, but I'm kind of fascinated at how not reflective product managers are about their practice and how they do their work. And I don't mean like individuals, like as an industry, I'm still figuring that one out. The anthropologist in me is like, this is fascinating, that you can just keep going without knowing what you're doing. Engineering, though, is very different, right? And this idea of the senior IC starts in engineering, like at least in the organizations that I've been part of or witnessed, there are often senior engineering ICs long before they're senior design ICs, because engineers, if you think designers are introverted and don't work well with people, so many companies have engineering architects and senior ICs, and so there's usually, if you're going to be able to get people to buy into design ICs, that should be in an organization that already has engineering ICs. If they don't have that yet, I guess you have to introduce it. Luckily, there's a bunch of resources out there. Actually, the Manager's Path book, Camille Fournier, touches on it a bit, but she's written more recently about staff engineering roles. There's a new book out from O'Reilly about the staff engineer's path. And what it means to grow as an IC engineer. And so I haven't read it yet, but there's wisdom there that we should be able to draw from. But even if there's not partners for the architect necessarily to work with from an IC perspective, the way I tend to see it is the architect is doing the creative work that like we think the VP of design should be doing but doesn't have capacity for. And so they should be able to operate kind of similarly from a creative standpoint. They shouldn't feel isolated. They should feel like they have the same relationships and connections. So I helped one company, an enterprise software firm, hire a design architect. I don't recall if he definitely didn't have product partners. It might have been some engineering partners. And they were primarily responsible for vision work. This was a company that had acquired a lot of companies. All these capabilities were not interwoven. It was just, as my client referred to it, a rubble pile, just stuff on the landscape. And so the job of that design architect was to communicate a narrative of how all these experiences could hang together and produce this material, which then becomes shared with these teams as a vision, and ideally taken in. But they didn't need an engineering partner. I mean, frankly, at this company, the vision, this coordinated vision, started in marketing because it was a way that they were trying to get customers to understand the value of all these things working together. The problem was the product wasn't delivering on the marketing, and so this was a role to try to figure out how do we now deliver on the promise that we're saying in marketing through the product experience. There was I said a lot of words. I hope some of them helped answer your question. Any more? One more? We have a hand up front here. We have two hands. The woman on the left first I saw raise. Well, it was her. Yes, please. We'll do two quickies. We'll
Gosh,
both
okay.
ask.
Okay, I had a two-parter, but we can just do one.
Okay.
I had a question about principal designer and design architect. So I just moved into a principal role. And I think there's a lot of overlap though, because when it comes to strategy and vision, I think there's a lot of that work that's sort of overlapping what I'm doing. So that was one. Do you see that as an overlap? Is that?
I see them. So I'm going to be talking about career architectures later today. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about levels. And the way I see it, if you use a kind of L1 to L7 model of design, L1 is junior, L2 is mid-level, L3 is senior, L4 is lead. L5 is staff/principal, depending on the organization, and L6 would be architect. That's the distinction. Just one is more senior than the other. They're doing very similar work. They're doing work that might overlap, but one maybe has, I don't like using years experience, but let's say one has 20 years experience in a certain set of kind of achievements, and the other has 12 to 15 years experience and just hasn't done as much, but they're doing similar work.
Okay. So the second part, really quick, was with the absence of a VP right now, it's coming, but the big question mark I have and the gap I see is actually that connection between strategy work and vision to actual tactical, getting the teams to action on it. Where do you see that role falling?
That's the director, right? That's kind of what we're trying to get at with this level, right? Take the align design execution with received strategy. Their job is to figure out how to get, this design director has 3 or 4 managers, so they're working with them to figure out how do we take what's coming in terms of a vision and strategy, and decompose it and make it digestible across these teams, while still hopefully ensuring coordination and coherence, so that each team isn't just doing their own thing, and then when it's all brought back together, you're like, what just happened? And Frankensteining. That's my glib initial response. We can talk more later. I want to get to the one last question.
Thank you very much.
Make it really long. I want folks here to just be suffering.
The answer might be long. So we doubled in size from 100 to 200 very, very quickly, less than a year. But that wasn't just in design.
Congratulations. Is that a good thing?
No, no. Well, yes and no. It created the chaos we needed to affect the change we needed with our parent company who bought us a few years ago. But with it came also an increase in breadth and capabilities. So I don't know where I fit on there, but I'm overseeing design, product, strategy, research, and creative tech. And I'm trying to make,
Are you the executive? Are you the head of all of those functions?
It basically landed on my lap, yes. But
Surprise!
But what I'm seeing is we need to do a lot of work with the design manager and design directors, which is great, but also looking at the different microcultures you get across design. Project management also, I think, is going to land on my lap. Product and all these. How do you look at the next layer? How do you make sure you have these structures, but you also reflect the different microcultures of each of these different sort of disciplines or capabilities?
So my initial thought on how to tackle that would be around charters. I'm horny for team charters. Because teams don't do enough to reflect on why they exist and what they're there for. You throw people together and then you're like, make stuff. And they're like, I guess we're a feature team now. But that's not aspirational. That's not anything to strive for. And so, your 100 or 200 person organization should have a charter, a vision, a mandate. But then each substantial subculture, as you're referring to it, should have one of those themselves, something that helps them understand their identity within that team and what they stand for within that team, again, within the larger team, so these things can cascade. But what I see is we don't do the work to reflect. We just start throwing people at effort, and then you get the image. It's a lot of weird images that come to mind. So there was plate spinning earlier. So this one is the images. If you've ever seen the movie The Wrong Trousers, Gromit, Wallace and Gromit movie, he's in a train and he's laying tracks in front of the train, and that's what I think of when I think of teams like this. They don't know where they're going; they're just going, and they're on the go. They got to keep going, but they have no idea where the destination is. And so that ability to step back, do the charter work, get some clarity as to where you're headed, so that you can then move into it. Measure twice, cut once. Like, there's a reason these proverbs exist. They're usually pretty smart. And we just, as a tech community, have decided to ignore them. Anyway, happy to talk more about that. It sounds like, excuse me, my voice is breaking. I'm going through puberty. It's late stage. It's kind of weird. Too much to talk about. in a brief sentence, but charters. Like if you're not doing team charters, do team charters. If you haven't got one for your team, that should be literally the next thing you do when you leave here, because that provides the foundation for your team to function as a team and not just some collection of individuals who happen to report to the same person.
Let's have a big round of applause for Peter.
No worries.